Hello everyone, welcome to Mind Podcast Buddhism. Today, we will talk about the topic, practicing asceticism. What does it mean? Join us as we delve into the meaning and significance of ascetic practices in Buddhism, exploring their purpose and how they help in purifying the mind and reducing defilements. Practicing asceticism, what does it mean? Today, we begin to study and discuss ascetic practices, known as Dhutanga methods. These practices are presented here because they help us further purify and reduce our defilements. First and foremost, we need purification or moral discipline. Additionally, we need to practice some of these ascetic methods to at least minimize our defilements. In this chapter, 13 Dhutanga practices are presented. According to the texts, these 13 practices were permitted by the Buddha. They are mentioned in both the Vinaya Pitaka, the monastic disciplinary texts, and the Sutta Pitaka, the discourses. These practices are not precepts. We practice them not as precepts, but as supplementary or additional practices. There are 13 practices in total, listed as follows. 1. The practice of wearing cast-off rags. 2. The practice of using only 3 robes. 3. The practice of alms-gathering. 4. The practice of gathering alms from each house in turn. 5. The practice of eating only 1 meal a day. 6. The practice of eating from the alms bowl. 7. The practice of not accepting food after mealtime. 8. The practice of dwelling in the forest. 9. The practice of dwelling at the foot of a tree. 10. The practice of dwelling in the open air. 11. The practice of dwelling in a cemetery. 12. The practice of dwelling in any available lodging. 13. The practice of not lying down. In the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, the meanings of the names of these practices are explained first, followed by the explanations of the practices themselves. The explanations of the names mostly relate to the Pai language, so the translations might seem somewhat awkward or literal. The first practice, wearing cast-off rags. In the past, before the Buddha allowed monks to wear robes offered by lay people, monks had to collect discarded cloth to make their robes. They would go to places like rubbish heaps or cemeteries and collect pieces of cloth that had been thrown away. They would then clean and sew these pieces together to make a robe. This is how monks obtained their robes before the Buddha permitted robes to be offered by lay people. Actually, the Buddha did not refuse the offering of robes to monks by lay people. It was simply that the opportunity had not arisen yet. One day, the physician Javaka had 2 very good pieces of cloth. He approached the Buddha and requested him to accept these pieces of cloth. He then requested the Buddha to allow monks to accept robes offered by lay people. From that time on, monks were permitted to either accept robes offered by lay people or collect discarded cloth to make their robes. The first Dhutanga practice is called the practice of wearing cast-off rags. This means that if a monk undertakes this practice, he must not accept robes offered by lay people. Instead, he must collect materials to make his own robe. In this text, in paragraph 15, it is stated that there are 23 sources of materials that can be used to make a robe. The first type is cloth from a cemetery, and the second type is cloth from a shop, and so on. These sources are described in the Visuddhimagga. The 23 types are sources of materials for making robes for monks in general, as well as for those practicing this Dhutanga. After explaining the 23 sources of materials for making robes, the author explains the practice itself. Let's look at paragraph 19. A robe that is offered by saying, "We offer this robe to the Sangha," or that is obtained by asking for it, is not considered a cast-off rag robe. Sometimes people offer robes to the Sangha, to the community of monks, rather than to individual monks. When there are enough robes, they are distributed among the monks. A robe offered to the Sangha and received by a monk practicing this Dhutanga is not considered a cast-off rag robe. The monk must not use such a robe received as a share from the Sangha. Suppose there are 10 monks living in a monastery and there are 10 robes. One of the monks will distribute the robes to the others. The best robe will go to the monk with the highest seniority. Sometimes monks go around asking for robes instead of food. Normally we go on alms rounds every morning, carrying our bowls into the village or town to receive or ask for food. But here, the monks ask for cloth instead of food. Robes received in any of these ways are not considered cast-off rag robes. In the 23 types of materials for making robes, there is one type mentioned as robes from another monk. This means robes offered by one monk to another monk practicing this dhutanga. For this case, we need to know a few things. In this paragraph, around the second sentence, Vijnanamoli misinterpreted some Pali words. I will explain this not according to his translation. A monk is allowed to offer a robe to another monk practicing this dhutanga. However, if a monk who is not practicing this dhutanga offers a robe to monks who are practicing it, and if the offering is based on or due to the seniority of those practicing monks, then that robe is not considered a cast-off rag robe. The monk practicing the dhutanga is not allowed to use that robe. Sometimes people build a monastery or a building and decide to offer robes to the monks who will reside there. Such robes are also not considered cast-off rag robes. So, if a monk not practicing the dhutanga offers a robe to monks practicing the dhutanga, he must offer it not based on seniority, but as a personal gift. This is the meaning presented here. In Vijnanamoli's translation, he misunderstood a word, and in the case of a robe offered by a monk that has been obtained at the end of the rainy season. This translation is quite wrong. The Pali word here is vasa, which can mean rain or year. The second meaning is year. It also means the number of years as a monk, a vasa. If someone asks me, how many vasas do you have? I would reply, I have 41 vasas. This means I have been a monk for 41 years. When robes are distributed, they are distributed based on seniority. Suppose there are 100 monks but only 50 robes. These 50 robes are distributed to the 50 most senior monks. The distribution stops there. When they have more robes, they will distribute them to the 51st monk and so on. This is how robes offered to the Sangha are distributed. The Pali word vasa here means the number of years as a monk, not the end of the rainy season. This is quite interesting, but also somewhat humorous. The Pali word is vasagar. Vasa can mean rain, year, or the number of years as a monk. Aga can mean end or edge. Vijnanamoli inferred that it means at the edge of the rainy season or the end of the rainy season. This is quite wrong. Here aga does not mean edge or end. Aga is something like a part or quantity, meaning the quantity of vasa. And vasa here does not mean rainy season, but the number of years as a monk. So when a monk not practicing the dhutanga offers a robe to monks practicing the dhutanga, he should not offer it based on their seniority. He should give the robes as a personal gift. This is the case of a robe offered by a monk not practicing the dhutanga to monks practicing the dhutanga. Now, if a monk not practicing the dhutanga receives a robe from lay people who place it at his feet rather than giving it directly to him, and then that monk places it in the hands of a monk practicing the dhutanga, this is called one-sided purity. When a robe is placed at the feet of a monk, it is called pure. When it is placed in the hands of a monk, it is not called pure. So it is pure one-sided. If lay people offer a robe directly to a monk and that monk places it at the feet of a monk practicing the dhutanga, this is also called one-sided purity. If lay people place a robe at the feet of a monk and that monk gives it to a monk practicing the dhutanga by placing the robe at the feet of the monk practicing the dhutanga, that robe is called pure both sides. A robe placed in the hands of a monk not practicing the dhutanga and then placed in the hands of a monk practicing the dhutanga is not considered a robe of a strict practitioner. Monks practicing the dhutanga are divided into 3 levels: superior, intermediate, and inferior. These 3 levels are presented here. Here, the monk who collects robes only from the cemetery is of the superior level. This monk is of the superior level. This means that the monk only collects robes from the cemetery. This practice is not feasible today. It is not feasible even in our country. In ancient times, people wrapped corpses in cloth and left them in the cemetery. The corpse was neither buried nor cremated, so monks could collect such cloth from the cemetery. Thus, today, for this dhutanga, there cannot be monks practicing at the superior level. The monk who collects robes discarded by someone with the thought, a monk will pick it up, is of the intermediate level. This means that someone discards a robe somewhere for monks to see and pick up. If a monk practicing the dhutanga picks up this robe, he is of the intermediate level. The monk who collects a robe placed at his feet by another monk is of the inferior level. Thus, there are 3 levels, or ranks, in each practice of the 13 Dhutanga practices. Therefore, there are 3 levels of classification for practitioners. The benefits of practicing are presented here. He truly practices in harmony with the requisites. There are 4 requisites for monks: roads, food, shelter, and medicine. They are called requisites. When a monk depends on roads collected from the cemetery and so forth, he is said to be practicing in harmony with the instructions for this requisite. He abides in the first type of noble heritage. The reference here is A27. There are 4 noble heritages: being content with whatever roads are available, being content with whatever food is available, being content with whatever shelter is available, and practicing meditation. These are for monks. These are called the 4 noble heritages. The commentator says, he abides in the first type of noble heritage, which means being content with whatever robes are available. The practice of wearing the 3 robes. The second Dhutanga practice is the practice of wearing the 3 robes. There are 3 robes designated for monks. If a monk uses only these 3 robes, he is considered to be practicing this Dhutanga. Let me show you the 3 robes. This is the under robe, Antaravasika. This is the upper robe, Uttarasanga. It is twice the size of the under robe. These are the 2 robes we usually wear daily. There is another robe called the Sangati and Padi. It has 2 layers. We call it the Great Robe. It has more sections or panels than the other robes. The other robe has only 5 sections or panels. We call them panels. This robe can have about 25 panels. Who makes these robes? Nowadays, lay people make and sell them. The Sangati is often used as a blanket. It has 2 layers, so in winter we use it as a blanket. The Buddha allowed the use of these 3 robes. When he wanted to permit the use of robes, the Buddha himself used these robes. According to the texts, on the coldest day of the year, probably in December, he wore just 1 robe, perhaps at night. He tried it and could bear it with 1 robe during the first watch of the night. Then he felt cold, so he added another robe. He could keep his body warm until the second watch. Then he added another robe. That kept him warm until the 3rd watch. At the end of the 3rd watch, he felt cold again, so he added another robe. Therefore, there were 4 robes in total. Monks are allowed to use these 4 robes. These 4 robes became 3 because 2 robes were combined into 1. Now we have 3 robes. A monk who uses only these 3 robes, no additional robes, no changes of robes, is called a monk practicing this Dhutanga. I have a question. If someone wants to become a monk and live a strict life, like practicing the 3 robes practice, it seems very difficult. The Buddha did not live in Alaska, a state in the USA known for its extremely cold and harsh climate. Yes, that's right. You see, I am currently wearing this extra jacket and hat. I would never use these in Myanmar. We have to adapt to the weather of the place where we live. The Buddha lived in India. India is not as cold as the United States or Alaska. We have to adjust some things, he taught. Perhaps the idea here is the minimum number of robes you can live with. The meaning here is minimalism. Some monks might have 10 or 12 sets of these 3 robes. Actually, it's not necessary to have that many. The essential need here is just 1 set of 3 robes. That's the idea. In ancient days, monks had to dye their robes themselves. When dyeing the robes, first the monk dyed the under robe, also known as the lower robe, or the upper robe, also known as the upper garment. The under robe means the smallest robe. After dyeing one of the 2 robes, the monk should wear it around the waist and dye the other one. This means that while dyeing the robes, one robe can be worn as the lower garment. After dyeing, the monk wears the dyed robe and dyes the other one, and so on. This is mentioned in paragraph 24. The multi-paneled robe refers to the Sangati, but he must not wear the multi-paneled robe around his waist. This robe must not be used as the underrobe, even temporarily. The Sangati should not be used as the underrobe at any time. This is to be done when staying in a village. This means in the village or near the village. But he may wash and dye both robes together if in the forest. He might not wear anything, but since he is in the forest, he can do so. However, he should sit near the robes so that if he sees a stranger, he can cover himself with the yellow robe. Why is this color used? I think this color is easily available and considered appropriate for renunciants who have left the household life. This color is actually between yellow and brown. No specific color is mentioned, but it should not be bright yellow. It should not be blue. It should be between yellow and brown. We get the dye from the bark of a tree or the heartwood of the jackfruit tree. I asked people here in the USA, where Venerable Silananda was giving this talk, if they knew what a jackfruit tree is, and they said no. The jackfruit is similar to breadfruit. The outer skin of the jackfruit has spikes, but not very sharp. It is a tropical fruit. The inner heartwood of that tree is dark brown. We take the heartwood, chop it into small pieces, and boil it. From that, we get the dye. When the cloth is dyed with that dye, it looks like the color of these robes. A monk practicing this dhutanga can have a fourth robe, or in other words, an additional piece of cloth. It is mentioned here, it is called the shoulder cloth. It is just a piece of cloth, 1 span wide, vitarato vidati, and 3 arms long, digato tihata. It is a piece of cloth to wrap around the body, to keep warm and also to absorb sweat, preventing the outer robe from getting wet with sweat. So only this fourth piece of cloth is allowed for the monk practicing this dhutanga. The practice of alms-gathering. The next dhutanga practice is the practice of alms-gathering. If a monk practices this, he must go for alms every day. He must not accept any meal invitations. There are 14 types of food not to be accepted. In paragraph 27, the monk practicing this alms-gathering should not accept the following 14 types of food: a meal offered to the sangha, a meal offered to specified monks. There is a monk responsible for designating monks to receive food. He may designate a specific monk to receive food at a specific layperson's house. This type of food is called food offered to a specified monk, an invited meal, a meal offered with a food ticket, distributed with food stamps, a fortnightly meal, which means once every fortnight. Some people offer food every fortnight, a upasatha day meal, which happens on full moon days, 15th, and new moon days, 29th or 30th. A meal on the first day of the fortnight, which means the day after the full moon, 16th, and the day after the new moon 1st. A meal offered to monks from afar, a meal offered to monks about to travel, a meal offered to sick monks, a meal offered to monks attending sick monks, a meal offered to a specific monastery, a specific vihara, a meal offered at the main house, the first house in the village, and a meal offered in rotation. Everyone takes turns offering food or a meal. These are the 14 types of food or meals that the monk practicing this dhutanga must not accept. He must go out for alms and receive food from the houses he visits. There are also 3 levels of this dhutanga practice. The strict monk practicing at the superior level receives food both from the front and the back. Do you understand? From the front and the back. Means, suppose the monk is standing in front of this house. If he is standing in front of this house and someone from the house at the back brings food to offer, that is called food from the back. And food from the front means food from the next house. So the monk practicing strictly receives food both from the front and the back. He hands over his bowl to the laypeople while he stands outside the gate. He stands in front of the house. People come out and say, "Please give us your bowl. We want to place food in your bowl." He hands over his bowl to them. Doing so is allowed for him, but he does not receive food by sitting and waiting for food to be brought on that day. The monk practicing at the intermediate level also receives food by sitting and waiting for food to be brought on that day, but he does not agree or promise to wait for food to be brought the next day. He does not promise to wait for the next day. The lenient monk, practicing at the inferior level, agrees or accepts food to be brought to offer the next day and the day after that. The latter 2 monks miss or lose the joy of independent living. You know, sometimes I cannot do what I want to do because I have accepted an invitation from someone and I have to be there. The meaning here is similar. The latter 2 monks miss or lose the joy of independent living. Perhaps there is a Dhamma talk about the noble heritage in a certain town. The superior monk says to the other 2, "Friends, let us go and listen to the Dhamma." One of the other 2 says, "Venerable Sir, a layperson has asked me to sit and wait here." And the other says, "Venerable Sir, I have agreed or promised to receive food tomorrow. so both of them are at a loss, disadvantaged, or losers. Both miss the opportunity to hear the Dhamma. The remaining monk, the superior monk, goes for alms in the morning and then enjoys the taste of the Dhamma. Let us read about the benefits. Indeed, he practices in harmony with this requisite. Because of the saying, monastic life depends on the use of alms food, he abides in the second type of noble heritage. His existence is independent or not dependent on others. It is the type of requisite praised by the Blessed One as not of much value, easily obtainable, not subject to criticism. Laziness is removed. Livelihood is purified. The observance of the minor rules of the Patimokkha is perfected. These minor rules state that you must go for alms. When you go for alms, you must be mindful. He is not supported by others. He is not dependent on another person. He helps others. Conceit is abandoned. Craving for flavors is controlled. The precepts 1, about eating in groups, 2, about replacing one invitation with another, and 3, about proper conduct are not violated. Here too, the translator misunderstood a word. This passage refers to 3 rules or 3 precepts for monks. The first precept states that if a group of monks is invited, they must not go together as a group to receive food. They are allowed to go individually but not as a group. A group here means 4 monks or more. Replacing one invitation with another means accepting a later invitation. For example, someone comes to me and invites me for food. Then another person comes later and invites me for food. If I accept the second invitation and then receive food from the second person, I violate this precept. That is the meaning here. Replacing here means not accepting food from the first person, but going to receive food from the second person. That is why we have to be careful with invitations. This must be done according to the rule of accepting the first invitation. We are not allowed to favor rejecting the first invitation to accept the second. Proper conduct is not actually proper conduct. The translator misunderstood the word karita. There is a rule prohibiting monks from visiting families before or after taking food at a household. Suppose I am invited to take food at a household. Before taking food at that household, I must not visit another household. And after taking food at that household, I must not visit another household. If I want to visit, I must inform another monk, "Venerable sir, I will visit that household." If he informs another monk nearby, it is fine. If there is no monk nearby to inform, or he does not inform anyone, and he visits another household before or after taking food at the household, he violates the rule. This rule in Pali is called karita. Karita can mean proper conduct. It also means going about. Here it is used in the second sense, which is visiting. Violating these 3 rules is mentioned here: receiving food in groups, accepting a later invitation, and visiting other households before or after taking food at the invited household. If you go for alms daily, you do not have to worry about any of these 3 rules. You will not violate any of these 3 rules because you do not accept invitations. You only go for alms. Thus, there is no violation of these rules if you practice the Dhutanga of daily alms-gathering. The practice of alms-gathering from each house. The next Dhutanga practice is the practice of alms-gathering from each house. This means that if a monk practices this Dhutanga, he must not skip any house. Suppose he is going for alms on a street with 10 houses. He must stop at all 10 houses. He must stop at each house and not skip any to go to the next one. This is the meaning of the term alms-gathering from each house. The commentator here gives some advice. First, the monk should carefully observe whether the street is clear and safe. If it is congested or unsafe, he should take another route. If there are certain houses from which he consistently does not receive food, he can regard those houses as not houses. He can skip those houses because they never offer food to him. In such cases, he can skip them. Let us look at the benefits mentioned in paragraph 33, around the 3rd or 4th line. He avoids the dangers of being dependent on a family. This statement is incorrect here. Hiyanamoli always makes this mistake. He avoids the dangers of frequently visiting families. A monk who frequently visits families is seen as a bad monk, a monk with poor conduct. But if he goes for alms, he does not have to visit them. He avoids the danger of being too familiar with families or lay people. Practicing ascetic practices or engaging in the world. Recently, The phenomenon of Venerable Tichmen II practicing the ascetic practices by walking from the south to the north has garnered admiration from the public from all walks of life. People wait for him along the road, bowing or kneeling in the road to pay homage, offering food and drink, sometimes accompanying him for long distances. Sometimes they gather around him at resting places, whether it is a cemetery, an abandoned house, or under a tree, sitting around him to listen to his teachings or to ask questions. Notably, in Thanh, a busload of primary school students eagerly ran to see and bow to him, and for the first time, a monk gave a Dharma talk in a cemetery. Venerable Mintu is admired because he is a symbol of renunciation of greed, as he does not accept monetary offerings, only water and food before noon, and does not accept more to save for the next day. Contrary to the luxurious lifestyle of some monks and nuns with phones, expensive cars, and Rolex watches, calling on Buddhists to donate all their assets to the temple for merit, and sending the collected money back to their parents to build houses. He is a living symbol of the time when the Buddha was still alive, with a shaved head, barefoot, wearing robes made from discarded cloth found in garbage dumps or cemeteries. He does not accept beautiful cloths donated by lay people. He does not stay in any place for more than 3 days and continues traveling like that until his death. He is a symbol of the eradication of ego by referring to himself as child to everyone, different from some young monks who are only 30 years old but call themselves teacher and address elders of 70, 80 years as child. He humbly says that he has not attained anything but only follows what the Buddha taught. In the past, the patriarchs only preached after attaining enlightenment. Today, due to the need for spreading the Dharma, temples organize training classes for young preachers, whose monastic life is not very long, so their words, though eloquent, do not match their actions, damaging the value of Buddhism and tarnishing the reputation of genuine practitioners. He is a symbol of the eradication of delusion. While today there are countless delusions captivating people such as jewelry, cosmetics, clothes, conveniences, vehicles, music, drugs, talent shows, beauty contests, with children as young as 5 or 3 years old knowing how to sing and dance on stage. The enthusiastic respect of the public leads to 2 consequences and shows us that this is a revival image of Buddhism deeply rooted in the hearts of the public, which is the spiritual and moral foundation of the nation for nearly 2,000 years. This is a very encouraging sign. This is the result and effort of many monks and nuns who have tirelessly practiced for at least half a century. The explosion of the media industry and the explosion of Dharma talks in temples or on forums have brought the teachings of the Buddha to the homes of the people. In the hectic and stressful life of the globalization era and the 5th scientific and technological revolution, people have begun to feel the need for a Buddha in their hearts or homes. When seeing Venerable Mintu, the public is reminded of the image of the Buddha of old. However, the overly enthusiastic praise of the public leads to the notion that only Venerable Mintu is practicing the right Dharma, while the tens of thousands of monks and nuns in temples, monasteries, and nunneries are not practicing the right Dharma, not the living image of the Buddha and his great disciples when the Buddha was alive. The image of the current monks and nuns is being diminished in the eyes of the public. As Buddhists concerned about the Dharma and the future of the nation, how should we think? Is practicing like Venerable Mintu the right Dharma, and should we practice like that? Indeed, practicing like Venerable Mintu is the right Dharma, but it is not the only practice. In the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha taught Subhuti that the Dharma of the thus come one has no high or low, meaning that any Dharma practice is acceptable depending on the practitioner's capabilities and commitments. In the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment, the Buddha taught Bodhisattva universal enlightenment that if someone says that I have eliminated all afflictions, the body and mind are completely empty, there is no, let alone the illusory realm of the senses, all are silent to seek perfect enlightenment. But the nature of perfect enlightenment is not the aspect of silence, so it is called a disease. Then the Buddha taught Bodhisattva perfect enlightenment. Those beings with the full potential for Mahayana, whether the Buddha is present or after his extinction, whether during the era of the Dharma's demise who want to practice or reside in a monastery, guiding disciples, then should accordingly reflect as I have said. The Buddha's words to universal enlightenment Bodhisattva in the above passage are as follows. Even though manifesting in worldly engagements, performing difficult tasks, but always keeping the mind pure, appearing to have faults to praise pure conduct, without letting beings fall into places without precepts or proper conduct. Venerable Men too follows the practice of seclusion, not accepting disciples or lay people, living alone, without a sangha, practicing austerity, to eradicate afflictions similar to the practice of the arahats. However, there are thousands of monks and nuns who are abiding temples, accepting disciples and serving the public, acting as engaged bodhisattvas to always act in harmony for the benefit of all beings. Practicing the ascetic practices means not engaging with the world, so there are few or no afflictions. Although it is an austere practice, it is easier. Whereas engaging with the world, being close to the mud, makes it easy to be tainted by the mud, and it is more difficult and prone to falling. Therefore, monks and nuns who reside in monasteries, accept disciples, teach, and work for the benefit of all beings, without letting their minds be tainted by the mud. As the sixth patriarch said, "Where is there any dust to be attracted to?" These are indeed holy monks. Therefore, we cannot underestimate the genuine practitioners in temples, monasteries, and nunneries. Imagine about 30,000 monks and nuns in the country, and thousands of monks and nuns overseas leaving temples and monasteries to become deserted, practicing the ascetic practices to follow the right dharma and be admired by the public. What would become of Buddhism? In my opinion, Buddhism would be destroyed. According to historical researchers, Buddhism declined in India because after the Buddha's extinction, his disciples retreated to caves and forests to practice and did not establish a strong Buddhist community in large cities. Therefore, Buddhism had no influence or strength to impact the government and the survival of the country. The establishment of a Sangha and Buddhist communities is very important. Temples gather lay Buddhists, serve as places for practice and activities for the benefit of all beings like the Vulan festival, wedding ceremonies, prayers for family peace, and memorial services for the deceased, and raising orphans along with organizing major festivals to pray for national peace. Imagine thousands of monks and nuns wandering the country, sleeping in forests, cemeteries, mounds, begging for food every day. It would not be a beautiful sanitary image and would cause difficulties for the people's lives. With such individual lives without a Sangha, how could they organize world Buddhist conferences to discuss contemporary issues like climate change, violence, war, or excessive material pursuit? Without cohesion and organization, how could there be the Vesak festival on the Buddha's birthday with the participation of Buddhist organizations worldwide and the United Nations and national leaders of Buddhist countries? Buddhism has gone through over 2,600 years. The essence of Buddhism remains the same, but the practice must adapt to the times according to the teaching, adapt to conditions but remain unchanged. Theravada practice differs slightly from Mahayana and Vajrayana, but the heart of all is the same one Dharma nature. All are children of the Buddha and all will become Buddhas. With the level of civilization, science, and logical thinking, Americans and Europeans do not value ascetic or self-mortification practices which have existed in their religion for thousands of years. They value an ordinary practitioner but with excellent conduct and wisdom, especially compassion and tolerance. Therefore, Zen practice and now Vajrayana have developed strongly in the Western world. If the image and lifestyle of Venerable Men too were spread in Western countries, they would wonder, why practice self-mortification like that? Is it not possible to attain enlightenment and liberation in monasteries? Buddhism is admired worldwide not because of ascetic practices, but as a religion of wisdom, peace, tolerance, equality, and environmental protection. Therefore, Vietnamese Buddhists should not, out of respect for Venerable Men too, underestimate the many monks and nuns in and outside the country who have been practicing genuinely, working to alleviate suffering, saving beings, and maintaining the spiritual and moral foundation for the nation for many years. Personally, I deeply respect Venerable Men too and his practice, but it is not the only practice. The Buddha taught 84,000 Dharma doors for monks and nuns according to their capacities and vows. Currently, there is a Chinese monk spreading the Dharma in Africa. He has vowed that after he passes away, he will be reborn in Africa to continue spreading the Dharma to beings on this continent. Is this not a bodhisattva entering the challenging mundane world to teach beings as taught by the Buddha in the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment without needing to practice the ascetic practices? Venerable Mentu is a fragrant flower in the garden of Buddhism, but there are many other precious flowers like Patriarch Bodhidharma, then the sixth Patriarch, Emperor Tran Yan Tong, Bodhisattva Quang Duc, and many holy monks and Zen masters of China, Vietnam, Japan, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama of today. I bow to all. This world is a world of relative duality and cannot be absolute. Only the mind becomes a Buddha while the material world remains as it is. Before the Buddha was born, birds ate worms. When the Buddha attained enlightenment and turned the Dharma wheel, birds still ate worms. And after the Buddha's extinction, birds still eat worms to this day. Even though Prince Siddhartha became a Buddha, he could not change this world. That is the law of impermanence in birth, old age, sickness, death. When hungry, the Buddha still had to eat. Therefore, the correct and mainstream path is the middle way, living a normal life but strictly observing precepts and rejoicing in the Dharma, as taught by Emperor Tran Yan Tong. Live in the world but delight in the way, placing compassion above all. For the Buddha to reappear, we must wait a few thousand more years.